Happy Sunday, everybody. This is Zach Said It Again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I'm honored to have my friend and fellow author and Irish musician extraordinaire, Frank Emerson, on the phone with me. Thank you for talking to me today, Frank.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm honored that you asked me, Zach. Thank you.
Well, I'm very honored to have you here. You're a great a mentor of mine and someone that I look up greatly to as a person and as a fellow writer. And I really was grateful and privileged that you sent me your latest novel. Was this was your first novel, was it not?
First novel, yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes and the Unmasking of the Whitechapel Horror. And what you do is an amazing thing here. You take one of the most real-life, elusive criminals in history and pit him against the greatest fictitious sleuth of all time. And I think that is quite, I think that is a daring thing to do when you're doing fiction. Whatever prompted you to take on such two very well-known characters and blend them together, fiction and nonfiction?
Well, I've written a few short stories, Holmes short stories, and I kind of, I'll tell you what prompted me to start my whole interest in writing about Holmes to begin with. I got it was an email or a notice on Facebook, it doesn't matter, from an outfit that publishes books, mostly a lot of Sherlock Holmes books, and he sent out an assignment to them, and he says he challenged people to do it. I assumed it was going to be for a paying job, and it was Sherlock Holmes, Stranger Than Fact or Stranger Than Fiction. And so he kind of challenged you to use either historically accurate or just make something up. So I said, well, I'm going to try this and make it as about real people in that time period. And I tried to write it as Conan Doyle would have written it, and inserted Holmes and Watson into real life events. And it was a story that he didn't pick it up, but it was called the Adventure of the Purloined Pistol, and it was about Sherlock Holmes solving the theft of Wyatt Earp's Buntline Special, who he was in England to present to George V on his coronation in 1911. Now, all those people except for Holmes existed, but Earp wasn't in England in 1911, and he didn't. Of course, he was the owner of a Buntline Special, but anyway, that was the premise, and so it was Stranger Than Fact is the way I was going for it.
Sure.
And everything that was in the story was said by various actual people, not necessarily Holmes and Watson. And at times I just took dialogue that had been said by other people and had Holmes say it or Watson say it. So I tried to be historically accurate, except for the fact that it was fiction. But the good news is that it was later picked up by Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine, and it's in the pipeline to be published later this year in that magazine.
Oh, so you have another Holmes short story that should be published later.
Yeah, that'll be published later. Yeah.
Very good. And with the hybrid of fiction and truth, I thought you did a terrific job of the incredible research of the timeline of the actual happenings, from the death of Queen Victoria to the timeline of the actual murders from Jack the Ripper. I thought and using real people such as Detective Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline of Scotland Yard, using real people and making them part of the fictional story. I thought that you did a really incredible job. Was that obviously was a painstaking level of research.
Yeah, it took a while. Because Aberline was a real person. He was a chief of detectives, and he was the head man in the hunt for Jack the Ripper. And he obsessed about it for the rest of his life. And he was convinced that the person that I identified as the killer was in fact the killer. I mean, in real life. And the only thing that I interjected there was the help of Holmes and Watson.
And it really is, when you read, or when I read particularly, I don't know if it's just as a writer, but I like to, if I'm reading fiction, for things to be tied up nice and neat, happily ever after, if you will, because real life doesn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way in the case of Jack the Ripper. So I like that this one, for risk of spoiler alerts, was tied up nice and neat, and maybe it took Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson to be able to do that. Some larger-than-life fictional characters.
Right. Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Right. I think that you did very well. I always appreciate, you have a great, vast intellect and a razor-sharp wit, and I could see little bits of your wit in the story, and I appreciated that very much. I forget, there was a book that you had written about your journeys as playing different places, and you said some things like, I feel lower than Billy Barty's belly button. You know, do you remember what book that was in?
That was one of my short stories, I think. It was a book called Frank Tells Tales.
Yeah.
And it was a series of stories. I forget how many, but over my music career.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact time and place where I referred to Billy Barty's belly button.
Yeah.
Other than it was fun to write that phrase.
Right. But you sent that to me, and I really enjoyed reading it, and there were a lot of laughs in it, and I could see, little bits of, a lot of it was very, very British humor with, between Holmes and Watson, but every once in a while there was a line in there, and I said, that's a Frank line, I don't remember anything in particular, but I could tell.
I wanted to interject a little bit of wit or humor, if you will, but not too much, because having, if you read many of Doyle's, they call it the canon, the 56 short stories.
Sure.
There's not a lot of laughs in those stories.
Right. It's very serious. Very serious.
One of the things that the publishers who specialize in Holmes stories that they look for, if you're submitting something, a pastiche they call them, they want you to center on the timeline when Holmes and Watson lived, and refer to events that were possible at that time, and from 1881 to 1908, when they effectively finished their partnership. Although there were some stories after that Conan Doyle wrote. You can't, you're not going to talk about television or long distance air flights or anything like that.
Right.
It has to be true to the time period and in the manner in which Doyle would have written. So tried to copy his style as closely as possible.
But to interject some things in there that made it yours, which I think.
A little bit of humor, but not a lot, because it would have been rejected out of hand by a publisher.
Yeah, and I guess you have already answered this question, but since they do magazines of short stories related to the characters, but I was going to ask you if you had any difficulty with any type of copyright as far as Doyle is concerned.
No, not as far as copyright. No difficulties in copyright at all.
Was it in
difficulties where publishers didn't care for it or didn't fit their style, or I tried submitting it to several Ellery Queen mystery magazines, Sherlock Holmes mystery magazine, and it just wasn't their style, it wasn't their cup of tea, not that they're used to publishing.
Right.
So, yeah, but there are a lot of places. There are plenty of places that will publish it, but they certainly don't want to pay you for it, and it's not a lot of money anyway.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Trust me, I know.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. You're not. You don't join the writing game to make money unless you're one of about 15 names.
I think you're right.
In which case, just putting your name on it will make you money. But but I'm not one of those people, which is why I don't really write books anymore. But
I was thinking of changing my name to Kardashian.
Right.
See if that would work.
Yeah, and present myself as having no talent at all, and see if that might.
There you go.
Prove more successful. Yes, indeed. Couple of things I want to ask you about, or rather talk about in the story itself that I liked. First of all, this was in the day, back when detectives, and you watch a detective show now, and the detective is corrupt. But this is in the day when people were still looking to do the right thing. Holmes and Watson wanted to see justice served, and the bond between them, their friendship is something that cannot be broken. And I appreciated, the unflappable bond between the two men, because I think, friendship is so important and so undermined these days, and unfortunately, a bond that strong is seldom only seen in fiction. But I appreciated the bond between Holmes and Watson. But having said that, you did not leave Holmes without his own demons. Now, I'm not very well versed on Sherlock Holmes or Arthur Conan Doyle or anything like that. I even mentioned in the article that I flunked a test on Hound of the Baskervilles in my sophomore English class. So, but I found your story to be very entertaining, very difficult to put down. You can go on YouTube now and type in Sherlock Holmes ambiance music, and you can play that on YouTube while you're reading. So I did that.
Did you?
And that just, and you have the rain and the horse carriage. You hear the horse carriage outside while soft music is playing and a crackling fire, and I whipped through that thing in no time at all. It was just very entertaining and from start to finish. But something that really caught me was, and again, this is risk of spoiler alert, so if you haven't read it, maybe you want to pause it here. But Sherlock Holmes had a cocaine problem.
Right.
Now, was this something that was in the other stories, or is this something you invented entirely?
No, in several of the stories, the cocaine comes up.
Okay.
And the thing, and Watson deals Holmes, well, Watson for that matter too. Holmes, Doyle deals with it in a way that, not that it makes it understandable, but it makes you understand that Holmes is human and is liable to have foibles and individual vices.
Yes.
And he started on the cocaine after having read that Freud, and this is true, that early in his career, he advocated cocaine. Mm-hmm. And for the use of relaxation and or inspiration or energy for that matter.
Sure.
And he later came to disavow that, as did Holmes in the stories. But there's someone wrote a pastiche called the 7% Solution, and that's the cocaine. Mm-hmm. And they made a movie out of it, I think, as well. I know they did. And it was a 7% cocaine solution in saline, I guess. and eventually he disavows it much to Watson's delight, because Watson always tried to. Once he realized that Holmes used cocaine, he immediately started to chastise him for it and try to wean him off it. But he would use it at times of inactivity, and as Holmes says, I think I said it once or twice in the book, is that he abhors inaction, but his brain is constantly working. But he wants to have the game afoot, if you will, to use one of his phrases as well, and be doing something. And the lack of, if he had a fallow period, he could only play the violin so much, and he would turn to cocaine.
Yeah, because he had to do something to fill in those gaps where he could do absolutely nothing. Yeah. And not only could he do absolutely nothing, but lives were being lost during those periods of inactivity.
Right.
And but the great thing about your story is that these victims, these real life victims, were never vindicated, and in this way, albeit a fictional story, they received vindication in some way. And the story is old enough, like you couldn't do a story of a recent murder case that was never vindicated, because there might be people around who would be affected by it. It's an old enough case that they can get vindication, but it's not gonna directly affect anybody that's alive today. So, you know. Can you speak a little bit to the bond of Watson and Holmes as captured in your story? Because he does mention, I've been taking company with this woman, or even married this woman, but she catches a disease and didn't make it, or died in childbirth. I mean, the bond between Watson and Holmes is the essential the essential relationship in the story.
Yeah, for want of I'm not going to make light of it, but for want of a better description, the Watson and Holmes stories is perhaps the first of the buddy stories, like the buddy movies today, Lethal Weapon. Any buddy stories, particularly having to do with detectives. And Holmes and Watson would, I believe, the first of that. There had been detective stories earlier. Poe was the they say that he was the inventor of the detective story, but there had been a couple earlier, but it was always a single individual. At Holmes and Watson, it was absolutely a symbiotic relationship, and Holmes they were very fond of each other, but Watson married several times, and they had room together in Baker Street, which was right at the beginning of their. That's how they started off their relationship. They both needed a place to stay, and sharing the rent in 221D Baker Street. And Holmes has said that he described Watson several times, not only as his friend and his partner, but as his Boswell. He said, "What would I do without my Boswell, my biographer?" And that shows up in several stories as well, besides mine. And it can't be emphasized enough. And there's nothing salacious about the relationship. It's symbiotic. They were very fond of each other, and as you said, their prime concern was to see that justice was done.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they are the first of the buddy stories, because even into the 20th century, you look into the detective stories, Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe. They don't allow themselves to get close to anyone. Sam Spade has a detective at the beginning of the Maltese Falcon who gets shot in the first chapter.
Yeah.
So he's not allowed to have that kind of friendship or that kind of devotion to anybody else, because you don't trust anybody else, and so that
he didn't particularly like him very much either.
Yeah, yeah, and that kind of trust and bond and friendship, I think, is something that we all really are looking to find, whether we want to admit that or not. And sadly, you covered all that very well. It was a very entertaining story, and I enjoyed it very much. And I really thank you for including me on it. Is there anything that I did not cover within your story that you'd like to talk about?
No, you did great, Zach, and I appreciate you not beating me up or pointing out any mistakes.
No, I didn't. If there were any, I didn't notice them.
That's very kind of you. I owe you $1 for that.
Yeah. No. I thought it was terrific. April 3rd is when it will be available.
That's the hard copy publication. It's already out in Kindle.
Yep.
And it's going to be. I just got told the other day by the publisher that they've done an audio version of it.
Oh,
and
wonderful!
They sent me a sample of the fellow that they have, and it must be an in-house actor that they have there. But it was just 5 minutes or so, and I said, it's exactly the voice I would have pictured for Watson, or for Doyle for that matter, at that time. And I've heard Doyle talk, on old films. And really, the guy in my audio version, in the audio version, does not sound like Doyle, but he sounds like you would want Doyle to sound. But it sounds exactly like you would want Watson to sound.
Well, good. I'm glad you're pleased with it. I should think they would have asked you to do.
No. You needed somebody from there, and that's what they got. Somebody from England.
Good. That sounds terrific. Sounds like it would be enjoyable to listen to. So what can Frank Emerson's readers expect next, other than the short story?
I don't know whether I have another novel in me, Zach. But I'm working on another short story now, and hopefully I'll be able to write it. And as we talked about earlier, I kind of set myself a hard row to hoe there, because I try to stick to stick as close as possible to facts of a crime that was committed in that time period. And sometimes there's just not a lot of information. I was lucky that the Ripper thing had a ton of information available public that the public could see and read off the internet, and that's what makes it a little tougher when things are a little bit more obscure, and they may have been very exciting and very noteworthy at the time that it took place, but not enough so that they would continue to write reports of it in newspapers and all that. So some of it is a little bit more fictional than I would usually prefer.
Sure. You speak about watching the Sherlock Holmes movies, and I have not seen them, but do you watch the newer versions of the Sherlock Holmes, Robert Downey Jr., any of that?
No, I've seen one or two, and they're enjoyable, but they're nothing like Holmes.
Right.
The thing that I find, of course, everybody's, well, not everybody, but most people, when somebody says Sherlock Holmes, they think of Basil Rathbone's version, Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce,
right,
on these Sherlock Holmes movies that they made in the 40s.
Right.
And those are all right. I object to Nigel Bruce. I don't have anything against Nigel Bruce as an actor. I think he's fine. I just think he's wrong for the Watson part,
right,
or at least the direction and the writing. The thing that I found most accurate, to take nothing away from Basil Rathbone or Watson or Nigel Bruce, I think they do a fine job as it was written and as they played it. They were directed to play it as such. Rathbone is certainly more accurate, but the thing that I found, the rendition that I found most accurate, is it's from I don't know whether it's from Granada Television or Thames Television, but it was the one. It was on a series on public broadcasting with Jeremy Brett and Edward Hardwicke as Holmes, and he's much more true to the Holmes character as written by Conan Doyle, much more true to the Watson character as written by Conan Doyle. I think part of that is due to the fact that they do a dramatization of the stories that were written by Conan Doyle. And so a lot of the dialogue is exactly as Doyle would write it. And it portrayed Holmes more accurately and as portrayed in the books, because Holmes is kind of an oddball. He's an odd character, and you can get that just from reading the stories. Keeping his tobacco in a Persian slipper on his mantelpiece and taking target practice in this apartment with his pistol and of course the cocaine, and he's just very odd. So and Jeremy Brett is the one that I think portrayed him most accurately.
And with your other type of writing, do you have any more local history type writings in the works or anything like that in the pipeline?
No, nothing right now.
Okay. Well, I wish you great success with the Sherlock Holmes. It was indeed a daring undertaking, and I think you did so very admirably.
Thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate your compliments. I praise.
I enjoyed reading the book and getting to publicize it. And it's always great to talk to you, Frank.
Well, thanks, Zach. You too. Best to Emily and Bella, and of course yourself.
Thank you very much, and same to you and Francis. And I hope that you're enjoying both of you being retired now.
Well, it's kind of hard to get used to that.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
But we'll work on it.
I can imagine so. Well, best to both of you, and thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. Bye, Frank.
So long now.